She told me I wasn't welcome. Not in her home, not in my son's life, not even in the family I built with my own hands. That was the sentence that played in my head as I stood outside their house, my son's house, holding a basket of homemade bread that was already growing cold. The wind kept lifting the edge of the cloth I had laid over it, letting the warmth escape into the early evening air. My fingers trembled, but I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the words she had thrown at me only hours before. I could still hear her voice. Sharp, smooth, oddly calm. "Mary, I think it's best if you keep your distance. We're starting our married life fresh. And well, you're not really part of that picture. Not part of the picture. After 28 years of raising him, after holding him through fevers, heartbreaks, celebrations, and mistakes." I remember blinking at her, wondering if I had misheard. If maybe the clink of the coffee shop cups around us had distorted her words. But her eyes, those cool, carefully lined eyes, told me I hadn't misunderstood. She had rehearsed this. She had come prepared. And my son, my sweet Jason, wasn't even there to stop her. I didn't knock on their door that evening. I stood on the porch long enough for the sun to dip behind the neighboring rooftops, long enough for the bread to lose its softness, long enough to understand that if I rang the bell, she would answer, not him. And she'd see the little woven basket in my hand and give me that same smile, polite, empty, final. So I turned around, carried the bread back to my car, and placed it on the passenger seat like it was something fragile I needed to protect. I drove home with my chest aching in that quiet, dull way that tells you you're losing something slowly. Not in one blow, not in a loud explosion, but inch by inch, word by word. And as I parked in my driveway, the porch light flickering on the way it always did, I whispered something into the silence. I don't know what I did wrong. I truly didn't. But 3 months later, I would know exactly what I did wrong. And I would know exactly why she didn't want me anywhere near them. Because secrets don't stay buried forever. Not when money is involved. Not when betrayal is stitched into every stitch of a wedding dress. And certainly not when the very money used to push me out of my son's life came from my late husband's estate. Before everything fell apart, before she banned me from their lives, my days were simple and predictable in the way that makes a person feel anchored. I lived in a modest one-story house at the end of a quiet street, white shutters, blue door, the same house Jason grew up in. I kept his old room mostly untouched, except for the boxes of quilts I stored in the closet. Some mothers redecorate once their children leave. I held mine close, as if keeping the room intact would keep him tethered to me a little longer. I worked part-time at the community library, shelving returned books and helping children find stories about dragons or detectives. I baked on Sundays, watered my herb garden before sunrise, watched the 6 p.m. news with a cup of chamomile tea. My life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. Jason visited often back then before her. He'd stop by after work, still in his light blue mechanic uniform, smelling faintly of engine grease and that cologne he'd started wearing in college. He'd kiss my cheek, grab leftover lasagna from the fridge, and tell me about the customers who tried to diagnose their own cars from YouTube videos. I'd laugh. He'd laugh. He was my only child, my entire world in many ways. And then he met her. Emily. The first time he brought her over for dinner, I knew, somewhere deep in my ribs, that she didn't like me. She hid it well, but I'd raised a child, cared for a husband through illness, comforted neighbors through grief. A woman learns to read subtle things. The way someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes, the way they stiffen when you touch their arm, the way they look around your home as if cataloging imperfections. She tried to charm me, but some people charm like they're negotiating. Every gesture feels like a calculated exchange. Still, I welcomed her. I told myself to give her a chance. Love makes people nervous. Maybe she just didn't know me yet. The months that followed were a blur of tension I could never quite name. Jason still visited, but not as often. When he did, she'd call him 3 or 4 times while he was here. Once, she asked him to come home immediately because the lighting in the den felt off. and she couldn't adjust the dimmer switch herself. "Is she okay?" I'd asked. He'd sighed, embarrassed. "She just likes things a certain way." The wedding came quickly, too quickly, some said. They'd only been together 8 months when they announced their engagement. And what a wedding it was. Roses imported from Ecuador, a ballroom decorated with crystal chandeliers, a live string quartet playing songs none of us recognized. Everything sparkled, everything glowed. And as I sat in the second row, not the front row though I was his mother, I wondered how they afforded it. Jason made a decent living as a mechanic, but nothing extravagant. Emily worked at a boutique barely part-time. I asked him once gently, trying not to sound suspicious. "Oh, we had help," he'd said with a shrug. But he never said from whom. I didn't press. Maybe I should have. After the ceremony, Emily hugged her own mother for a long time, whispering something that made the woman smile softly. But when she hugged me, her arms barely touched my back. Polite, shallow, cold. 3 days later, she asked to meet me at a coffee shop. And that's when she told me I wasn't welcome. No explanation. "No, we need space. Just a clean surgical cut. We want a peaceful life," she'd said. And sometimes older family members bring stress. Older. Stress. Family members. Not your mother. Not Jason's mom. Just older family members. I remember stirring my coffee long after she left, even though I hadn't taken a single sip. I remember driving home feeling like my chest was filled with sand. I remember telling myself over and over that Jason would call, that he would explain, that he would apologize. He didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And somehow, without doing anything at all, I became the villain in a story I didn't even know was being written. But the truth had a way of creeping in through cracks. Quiet, persistent, unstoppable. And it started with something small. Something I almost ignored. A letter. Not addressed to me, but thrown accidentally into my mailbox. A letter that would unravel everything. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a dental clinic coupon. I remember standing at my mailbox, the sun just barely warming the damp grass, when I saw it. An envelope thicker than usual, the corner slightly crumpled as if it had been forced into the slot. It wasn't addressed to me. The name written in neat, looping handwriting was Mr. and Mrs. Jason Carter. My son's name. And hers, Emily's, aligned right beside it in ink that didn't smudge under my thumb. I shouldn't have opened it. Legally, morally, I knew that. But as I carried the envelope inside, something gnawed at me. Something sharp, something unrelenting. Something that told me this wasn't an accident at all. Even the mailman knew I lived alone. Jason hadn't lived with me for nearly a year. Yet here it was. A letter for them. Delivered to my house. It wasn't sealed tightly. One of those cheap envelopes where the adhesive barely holds. A thin slip of paper stuck out from the opening as if inviting me in. I told myself I'd simply check the return address. Nothing more. The moment I lifted the flap, the scent of fresh ink hit me. The kind used in official documents, not personal cards or invitations. Inside was a statement. A bank statement. And not just any bank. The bank where my late husband had kept his accounts. First, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the bank still had my address on file. Maybe this statement was a glitch, an error, some leftover administrative thing from my husband's old estate. But then my eyes caught the account name. Carter Family Special Events Fund. My breath hitched. My husband never created anything with that name. He had one primary account, one retirement account, and a small investment portfolio I liquidated after he passed. I handled all his affairs meticulously, painfully, through every line of paperwork and every signature that made me feel like I was erasing pieces of him. I would have remembered a special events fund. My heart began beating faster, loud, uneven thumps echoing in my ears. Below the account name was a list of transactions. My hands shook as I scanned them. $14, 200 withdrawn. Florist International Imports. $22, 450 payment. Grand Marquis Ballroom. $6, 800 deposit cash. $1, 900 withdrawal. Bridal Boutique Collection. $3, 300 payment. String Quartet of Raleigh. Each transaction was dated in the months leading up to Jason and Emily's wedding. I sat down slowly on the dining chair. The room felt too quiet. The refrigerator hum seemed louder than usual. I traced my finger over the numbers again. 14,000. 22,000. Nearly 7,000. Their wedding had cost a small fortune. A fortune they couldn't afford. I whispered into the empty room. This account. Whose account is this? The statement showed it clearly. Primary holder Jason Carter. Secondary authorized user Emily Carter. A second page had the contact information for the account manager. A woman named Darlene whom I recognized. She had handled my husband's estate years ago. She'd even offered her condolences while walking me through the final documents. Why would she be handling an account tied to my son? An account named in a way that felt familiar. As if someone had taken a piece of my husband's financial identity and repurposed it. I flipped to the back. And that's where everything inside me stilled. At the very bottom in faded ink was a footnote. Account originally created under Joseph Carter, deceased. My late husband's name. Joseph. A soft, gentle man who loved woodworking and blueberry pancakes. A man who apologized when he took the last cookie from the jar. A man who left behind exactly 3 accounts. 3. Not 4. Not this. Not something called special events. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the faint grooves where I had once sanded the wood by hand. My breath tightened in my chest. Someone had accessed my husband's funds. Someone had used his name. Someone had rerouted something. Without my knowledge and without my signature, after he passed. And my son had used that money for a wedding I wasn't even welcome at. For a wedding his wife made sure I felt excluded from. A warmth spread across my face. Anger, shame, confusion all tangled together. I didn't blame Jason. Not yet. Because as much as I loved him, I knew one thing for certain. My son had never been good with paperwork. He barely read his own lease when he first rented an apartment in his 20s. He once tossed an insurance renewal notice in the trash because he thought it was an advertisement. He would have signed anything if someone told him it was taken care of. And I knew exactly who would have told him that. Emily. She was meticulous. She handled everything, from registry items to vendor schedules. I'd overheard her once saying, Jason just doesn't understand finances. It's better if I manage it all. She said it like she was doing him a favor. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just a case of hidden spending. This was inheritance theft. This was fraud. This was deliberate. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to assume the worst. I decided I needed answers. Real answers. So that same afternoon I drove to the bank. I walked past the glass doors and into the cool, perfumed air that smelled faintly of old carpet and printer toner. The receptionist recognized me instantly. Small towns are never good at keeping secrets. Mary? It's been a while, she said warmly. How are you? I forced a smile. I found something. Something strange. I need to speak with Darlene. Her expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. That hint of recognition. That flicker of concern. She nodded quickly and walked off to get the manager. While I waited, I pressed my palms against my skirt, trying to quiet the tremble in my fingers. Darlene appeared a minute later, her glasses resting low on her nose, her expression kind but cautious. Mary, she said softly, come with me. Inside her office, she closed the door behind us. I placed the letter on her desk. Her eyes scanned it. Her lips pressed together. After a long moment, she looked up. Mary, how did you get this? It came to my mailbox, I said. And I think I deserve to know what's going on. She exhaled slowly, removing her glasses. Her fingers tapped nervously against the table. I wondered when this would come to light, she murmured. Those words made the hairs on my arms rise. When what would come to light? She hesitated, long, painful hesitation. Mary, the truth is, this account shouldn't exist. My breath stopped. This account, she continued, was created 2 years after Joseph passed. Someone used old authorization documents, faded signatures, pulled from archived files. Enough to slip through, but not enough to be legal. My stomach tightened. Someone forged my dead husband's information. Someone created an account using his identity. And someone used that money for a wedding I wasn't welcome at. I stared at the papers, my pulse loud in my ears. Who did this? I whispered. Darlene swallowed hard. Her answer changed everything. Darlene didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her fingertips pressed together, her eyes fixed not on me but on the paper between us. The air felt too still, too heavy, as if the room itself understood the weight of what was coming. Finally, she lifted her gaze. Mary, before I tell you anything, I need you to understand something. Her voice softened but grew firmer underneath. This wasn't simple mismanagement or an accidental oversight. This was deliberate. Intentional. The words scraped against my chest. Deliberate. Intentional. Words that sounded like betrayal wearing a tidy suit. I swallowed, my throat tight. Just tell me who did it. She hesitated again, only for a second this time, and then gently pushed one document in my direction. A signature line. Clear. Smooth. Confident. Emily Carter. The world stopped. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. Didn't move. It felt like every muscle in my body turned to stone, hardening around the blow I'd known deep down. I'd been walking toward for months. Emily. My daughter-in-law. The woman who told me I wasn't welcome. The woman who banned me from my own son's life. The woman who looked at my home, my face, my existence with thinly veiled contempt. She had done this. She had stolen from my husband's estate, from me, from Jason, and used that money to fund her perfect wedding. The crystal chandeliers. The imported roses. The designer dress with hand-stitched beading. All of it. Paid for with money Joseph left behind. Money meant to support our family. Money meant for Jason's future. Money meant for my stability. Money Emily had no right to touch. My hands trembled, but my voice came out steady. How? I asked. Darlene folded her arms. About 2 years after Joseph passed, someone came into the bank claiming to be finalizing forgotten documentation for a planned family fund. They used an old authorization form with Joseph's signature. A copy, barely legible, but technically passable if someone wasn't paying close attention. My stomach churned. I remembered those forms. Old papers from the safe, the ones we stored at home in a metal box Joseph bought after his first health scare. After he died, I packed everything away. Slowly, painfully. In a moment when grief fogged every decision. Anyone with access to that box. My chest tightened. Emily had been in my home many times that first year. She'd helped Jason organize things. Or so they said. She'd sorted through boxes in the garage while Jason trimmed the bushes outside. She'd offered to help me pack away anything too hard to look at. God, I had let her into my grief, and she used it to steal. Darlene continued quietly. The account was monitored lightly because it was considered inactive for long periods. It only became concerning once the wedding expenses began. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because, she said with a pained exhale, the authorized users were listed as Jason and Emily, and you weren't attached to the account. But it's my husband's. I stopped, my voice breaking. My husband's name. My husband's signature. My husband's memory. Used like a prop. A resource. a means to her beautiful, exclusive wedding. I looked up sharply. Did Jason know? This time the answer came quickly. No, she replied. In every interaction I had, it was Emily who called. Emily who coordinated. Emily who made purchases and signed forms. Every transfer was authorized by her. Jason's name wasn't even properly signed. A sickening wave washed over me. She had forged his name. She had forged his father-in-law's documents. She had forged the foundation of their entire life. The betrayal wasn't just of me. She had violated Jason too. My hands balled into fists in my lap. Not out of rage, but out of a grief I didn't know how to hold. Darlene leaned forward. Mary, whatever happened here wasn't accidental. And it wasn't something your son orchestrated. I'm certain of that. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Relief. Pain. Anger. All tangled into something messy and raw. What do I do? The question tasted bitter coming out. Darlene sighed. That depends on what you want. Legally, you could open a fraud case. She has committed a serious crime. But the process can be long, painful. Particularly for families. Families. I almost laughed. What family did I even have left? My son was barely speaking to me, not out of choice but because Emily shaped their life like a sculptor shapes clay, molding what she wanted and cutting away anything she didn't. But this was different. This wasn't emotional manipulation. This was theft. A theft that dug its claws into my husband's legacy. My breath steadied as a slow clarity settled over me like a thin layer of frost. I need time, I said quietly. Darlene nodded. Of course. When I stood to leave, her hand brushed mine gently. Mary. I'm sorry. Truly. I managed a small smile. So am I. The sun was bright when I stepped outside, too bright for the heaviness pressed against my ribs. I walked to my car in a daze, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes sounding strangely distant. Inside the car I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles whitened. I had been pushed out of my son's life. Banished. Excluded. Blamed for things I never did, never said. But the truth was far uglier than anything Emily accused me of. And she had kept it from Jason. Hidden it with manicured perfection. Wrapped it beneath lace and diamond rings. I sat there until my heartbeat slowed. Until the shock stopped ringing in my ears. Then something inside me shifted, quiet, firm, resolute. I would not let my husband's memory be stolen. I would not let my son be manipulated. I would not let Emily decide my place in this family. If she wanted to push me out, I would come back in with the truth. Not with anger. Not with vengeance. But with clarity. And consequences. I started the engine. Because the next step was clear. I needed to talk to Jason. And I needed to find out just how deep his wife's lies went. I drove home from the bank in silence, the kind that makes you feel every breath in your lungs. I kept both hands on the wheel, gripping it a little tighter than necessary, afraid that if I let go, even for a second, the weight of what I had learned would swallow me whole. Emily had stolen from my husband. She had stolen from my son. She had stolen from our family. And she had done it with a precision that told me this wasn't a moment of desperation. This was a plan. But the part that gnawed at me the most, the part that made my chest ache, was the thought of Jason. My sweet, earnest boy who had always wanted to believe the best in people. The practical mechanic who fixed things with his hands, because he didn't know how to fix people with his words. He trusted her. He loved her. And she used that love like a shield. A barrier that kept everyone else, including me, at a distance. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my head was pounding. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel for a moment before getting out of the car. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the bush I planted years ago, the one my husband used to trim on Saturday mornings. I closed my eyes. Joseph, I whispered into the quiet. How do I tell our son what she did? The wind rustled the leaves as if answering. I knew I had to talk to Jason, but I didn't want to confront him with anger. That would only push him further under her influence. I had to give him the truth gently, piece by piece, so he could see the betrayal with his own eyes. I waited 2 days. 2 long days where I didn't sleep much, didn't eat much, and reread every line of that bank statement as if it might suddenly tell me something new. On the 3rd morning I texted him. "Oh, hi sweetheart. Are you free to talk sometime today? I really like to see you." I half expected him not to reply. Half expected Emily to intercept the message. But 20 minutes later my phone buzzed. "Jason." "Yeah, Mom. Can I come by around 5? I exhaled a shaky breath. He was coming. Alone, I hoped. Those hours crawled past like years. I made tea and poured it out. I paced. I baked muffins and threw half of them away because I couldn't stop burning them. My hands wouldn't stay steady. By 4:50 I was staring out the window waiting. At exactly 5:03 his car pulled up. Jason stepped out, taller than I remembered needing to look up at, his hair a little longer. His jaw set in a way that told me he hadn't been sleeping either. He walked up the front steps. I opened the door before he knocked. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "Hi, sweetheart." I whispered and hugged him tightly. At first he stiffened just a little, like he wasn't used to being held without judgment, but then he relaxed and hugged me back. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table while I poured 2 cups of tea, something so familiar it grounded me long enough to gather my courage. He looked around the kitchen, his expression unreadable. "Everything looks the same." "It is," I said. "Not much has changed." He nodded slowly but didn't say anything else. I sat across from him, folding my hands together. "Jason, I need to talk to you about something important. Something I found out." Immediately his posture stiffened. "Is this about Emily?" he asked, cautious. "Yes." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, if this is about what she said, about needing space." "It isn't," I said gently, cutting him off. He blinked. "Oh." I reached into the drawer beside me and placed the bank statement on the table. He frowned, puzzled, then pulled it closer. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched confusion settle into his features. What is this?" he asked. "That's what I came here to ask you," I replied softly. He skimmed the transaction list, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. These are wedding expenses." "I know." He looked up at me, bewildered. "But what does this have to do with Dad?" "It says, I need you to look at the top, sweetheart." He looked again. At the account name. At the original holder. At my late husband's name. Jason's face drained of color. "No," he said quietly. No. This can't be right. I wish it weren't." He flipped the page, faster this time, almost frantic now. His finger traced Emily's signature, then the scrawled imitation next to it that was supposed to be his. "My God." His voice cracked. "She forged my name." I nodded, though the motion felt heavy. "She forged a lot more than that." He stared at the paper as if it had betrayed him too. "How long?" he whispered. "How long has this account even existed?" 2 years after your father passed." Jason pressed a hand to his mouth. His shoulders shook. Not violently, but enough for me to see the storm breaking inside him. He was trying not to cry. My strong boy. My quiet boy. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. "Jason, did you know anything about this?" He shook his head quickly, his voice barely a sound. "No. Mom, I swear I didn't. Emily told me. She told me her parents were helping with the wedding. She told me the money was all handled. She said she had a family fund her mom set up." A cold shiver slid down my spine. A family fund. She hadn't been lying about that, just the family. Jason looked back at the papers, his breathing uneven. "She did this," he whispered, the words almost strangled. "She stole from Dad. She stole from you." And from you, I said quietly. He swallowed, his throat working visibly. How could she do this? I didn't answer. Sometimes the truth hurts more than silence ever could. After a moment, he pushed back from the table and stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. His hands kept opening and closing, as if he needed something to hold on to. Mom, I think I married a stranger, he said. The pain in his voice cut through me. You married a woman who hid things from you, I said softly. But you're not responsible for what she chose to steal. He rubbed his face again, pacing still. Jason, I continued gently, we need to decide what to do. He stopped walking, his eyes red but steady. I need to talk to her, he said. I nodded. I expected that. But then he added something I didn't expect. And Mom, I want you there. My breath caught. He had chosen me. For the first time in months, he chose me. I stood and hugged him again. This time he didn't hold back. When he left, it was to confront the woman he thought he knew. And I had no idea just how dramatic that confrontation would become. But one thing was certain. Emily wasn't about to let her secrets unravel quietly. Jason left my house that evening with a storm in his eyes. The kind of storm Joseph used to get during hurricane season, silent but charged with something dangerous beneath the calm. I watched him pull out of the driveway, the taillights glowing red against the darkening sky, and I knew he wasn't going home to talk. He was going home to demand answers. I stood there long after his car disappeared down the street. My hands trembled from a mix of dread and relief. I had wanted the truth to come out, but I knew the truth had claws. It didn't arrive politely. It tore through lives, through illusions, through marriages. I prayed my son was strong enough to withstand it. I didn't hear from him that night. Not a text. Not a call. The silence clung to me like humidity. I barely slept, drifting in and out, waking at every phantom sound. Footsteps on the porch, a car door shutting, my phone buzzing when it hadn't moved at all. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I made coffee but barely drank it. The toast burned. I didn't bother remaking it. Around 9:30 a.m. my phone buzzed. Jason. Mom, can you come over? Please. My breath caught. No details. No tone. Just urgency. I grabbed my keys and left without even brushing my hair. The drive felt longer than usual, each red light stretching like a warning I didn't want to heed. When I pulled onto their street, the first thing I noticed was the front door wide open. The second thing I noticed was Jason sitting on the bottom stair inside. Elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together as if holding himself upright was an effort. Jason. I hurried inside. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, not from rage but from something deeper. Something quieter, more painful. She's in the kitchen, he said, voice hoarse. I walked past him slowly. Emily was sitting at the dining table, her head in her hands. Her hair was unbrushed, her makeup smudged. When she looked up at me, her eyes flashed, not with guilt, not with sorrow, with fear and anger. She stood abruptly. I can't believe you brought her into this, she snapped at Jason. I didn't bring her into anything, he replied, voice sharp. You dragged her into this the moment you stole from my father. Emily's face twisted. Stole? Jason, I managed your father's leftover funds. Your mother had no idea how to handle finances. She was drowning and I cleaned it up. The bitterness in her voice struck me like a slap. I replied calmly, I handled everything just fine. What you did wasn't management. It was theft. Emily let out a cold laugh. You never liked me. You think you're better than me. This isn't about liking you, I said softly. It's about what you did. Jason stepped between us, not to protect her, but to keep the conversation from turning into a shouting match. Tell me the truth, he said firmly. All of it. No more excuses. No more stories. Emily crossed her arms, her expression tightening. Fine, she snapped. You want the truth? The wedding, our wedding, was supposed to be the start of a beautiful life. A real celebration. Something neither of us had growing up. I wasn't going to let your mom's stinginess ruin that. I stared at her stunned. Stinginess. She shrugged, unapologetic. Your inheritance was just sitting there, being wasted. And it wasn't yours. Jason shouted, his voice cracking. That money belonged to my father and my mother. You had no right. Emily's eyes narrowed. I had every right if it meant building our future. And let's be honest, your mother wasn't exactly contributing much to our lives. A tremor went through Jason. He took a step back as though the words physically pushed him. I felt a hollowness break open inside me. It wasn't the insult. It was seeing the last thread of illusion slip from my son's face. Emily wasn't who he thought she was. She wasn't who she pretended to be. Did you forge my name? Jason asked quietly. Her jaw tightened. Silence answered for her. Jason closed his eyes as if absorbing a blow. When he opened them again, they were wet. Why, Emily? He whispered. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just sighed, exasperated. Because you wouldn't have understood. You always let your mother influence you. You're too soft, Jason. Someone had to make decisions. I saw him flinch. A small, sharp pain in his expression. He had heard that before. Many times. Did you ever love me? He asked. She laughed, not cruelly but emptily. Of course I loved you. But love doesn't pay for weddings or houses or the future. Jason wiped at his face. So everything we built was bought with stolen money. It wasn't stolen, she shouted. It was unclaimed. Money nobody was using. My voice came out small but steady. Emily. That was my husband's legacy. It was meant for our son. For his future. You took that from him. Her eyes darted toward me with something venomous. You think he would have had a future if we didn't have a wedding that made people respect us? You're so old-fashioned, Mary. Nobody respects a cheap marriage. Jason covered his face with both hands. Emily, stop, he whispered. Just stop. She didn't. This. She gestured toward the house, the furniture, the framed wedding photos. All of this came from that account. From money your mother never touched. I made something out of nothing. My heart cracked at the arrogance in her voice. Jason dropped his hands to his sides. I can't do this anymore, he said quietly. I can't be with someone who lies to me, who steals, who hurts my family. Emily froze. You can't be serious. I want you to leave, he said. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Her eyes widened, filling not with tears but pure disbelief. You're choosing her over me? She demanded. No, he said gently. I'm choosing the truth. Emily shook her head hard, stumbling backward. Fine. Fine. You think you're going to be some noble hero? You'll regret this, Jason. You'll see what life is like without me. She grabbed her purse, shoved her feet into her shoes, and stormed out the door, slamming it behind her so forcefully the picture frames rattled. Jason stood there, staring at the empty doorway, his chest rising and falling unevenly. I walked toward him. Jason, I said softly. He turned, eyes red, and collapsed into my arms. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I held him as he sobbed, quiet, broken sobs he hadn't let himself release in years. There was pain in that moment, but there was healing too, and something else beginning to grow. Truth. Jason cried quietly. No theatrics, no raised voice. Just the soft, breaking sound of a man realizing his marriage had been built on a lie. I held him like I used to when he was little, back when he'd scrape his knee or lose a toy and believed his whole world was ending. Except this time the wound was deeper. Invisible. And no amount of rubbing his back could make it disappear. When his breathing finally steadied, we sat down together at the kitchen table. The same table he once told me he hoped to build a family around. The same table Emily now fled from with anger burning in her eyes. Jason wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Mom," he whispered. "What do I do now?" "You take it one step at a time," I said softly. "The truth is out now. That's the hardest part." But it wasn't the end. Not even close. Emily didn't stay quiet. By the next morning, the fallout had begun. Jason called me early, too early for a Sunday. "She posted something online," he said, voice tight. "Posted what?" "Just you should see it." I wasn't on social media much, but he texted me a screenshot. My heart dropped as I read Emily's carefully constructed post. Sometimes you marry someone only to discover their family is toxic. Sometimes those people manipulate situations to destroy marriages. I never thought I'd be the victim of a mother-in-law's jealousy. Pray for me. 1,000 little knives in the form of words. I stared at the screen speechless. She had twisted everything, painting herself as the victim, casting me as the villain. There were already dozens of comments beneath it. "She doesn't deserve this. Mother-in-laws can be monsters. Stay strong, girl. You should divorce him before it gets worse." I exhaled slowly. She's trying to control the narrative. Jason's jaw tightened. "Not this time." He ended the call abruptly, not angrily, just determined. I had no idea what he planned to do until an hour later, when my phone rang again. His voice shook, not from fear but adrenaline. "Mom, I went to her parents' house." "What? Why?" "Because they deserve to know what she did. Because everyone who thinks she's some helpless victim deserves to know." He told me what happened. Emily wasn't home, but her parents were. And Jason, hurt, trembling, heartbroken Jason, told them everything. Calmly, factually, without embellishment or spite. First, they didn't believe him. Then he showed them the bank statement, the forged signatures, the transactions, the account name linked to my late husband. Her father went ghost pale. Her mother sat down abruptly and covered her mouth, whispering, "Emilio." Jason told me her father said, voice barely above a whisper, "She took money from her sister's college fund last year. We didn't want to believe she could." I closed my eyes. This wasn't her first act of betrayal. Just the first one she'd been caught in so thoroughly. Jason left their home with shaky legs and a heavy heart. But there was more. It wasn't Jason who made things public next. It was Emily. Again. By afternoon, she posted a second message. "To those wondering about the accusations being spread about me, I never stole anything. I managed a forgotten account because no one else in the family was responsible. I'm being framed because I wanted a better life than my husband's mother could accept." Hundreds of reactions. People taking sides. Most of them on hers. But all of that shifted in less than 20 minutes. Jason replied publicly. His message was short, steady, and impossible to ignore. "Emily, the account was created 2 years after my father passed away. You forged documents. You forged MY signature. You admitted all of this yesterday. Mom didn't frame you. You just ran out of places to hide." Then he posted the proof. The signatures. The dates. The comparison between my husband's authentic documents and the ones Emily altered. The comment section erupted like fireworks on New Year's Eve, bright, loud, chaotic. People who once comforted her were now confused, then suspicious, then furious. Comments flooded in. "Why would you forge his name if it was honest? This is fraud. She stole from a dead man? You owe his family an apology. Girl, you need a lawyer." The tide had turned, and Emily realized it. She deleted her original posts. Every last one. But the internet never forgets. Screenshots were everywhere. And then her parents posted a statement of their own, one that shocked everyone. "As deeply painful as this is, we acknowledge that our daughter has made decisions we cannot defend. We hope she finds the help she clearly needs." It spread like wildfire through their small town. Emily tried to call Jason 7 times. He didn't answer. She showed up at his job, tears and accusations spilling out of her all at once. Jason, you made me look like a criminal. You humiliated me. You think your precious mother is perfect? She's manipulating you. I did this for us. For our future. Jason told me later how he stood there, grease on his hands, coworkers staring, and said, "You didn't do this for us. You did it for yourself. And you destroyed our marriage in the process." When she realized he meant it, truly meant it, something in her face crumpled. But manipulation is a language some people speak fluently. You're leaving me? Her voice cracked with a performative tremble. Jason remained calm. I'm ending something that was never real. She stared at him breathless. Then she slapped him. Right there in the garage. In front of customers. In front of witnesses. His coworkers stepped in. His manager demanded she leave immediately. And just like that, the facade she built collapsed in front of the whole town. But the consequence wasn't just humiliation. There were legal consequences too. Jason and I filed a report together. Not out of revenge. Out of necessity. Fraud. Identity theft. Unauthorized access of a deceased person's financial documents. The officer who took our statement said quietly, "We've heard her name before." And that was the moment I knew. Emily's world wasn't collapsing because of us. It was collapsing because she built it on lies. And lies never hold. That night, Jason came to stay at my house. He slept in his old room. Untouched, preserved, safe. I checked on him before bed. His eyes were closed, but I could tell he wasn't really asleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the blanket like I used to. "Mom," he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for not giving up on me." My throat tightened. "I never will." He finally drifted off. And for the first time in a long time, my home felt whole again. Not perfect. Not healed. But whole. Tomorrow we would face the aftermath. Together. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. Not peaceful quiet. Like the air after a storm when debris still litters the ground. And you're not yet sure if another wave of thunder is coming. Jason stayed with me for 3 nights. He didn't talk much at first. He spent long hours sitting on the back porch, staring at the little patch of garden Joseph used to tend. Sometimes he'd pick at the peeling paint on the porch railing. Sometimes he'd run his hands through his hair so many times it stood on end. I didn't push him. Healing has its own timing. I cooked meals like I used to, chicken soup, roasted potatoes, warm rolls, but he didn't eat more than a few bites the first 2 days. And I didn't mind. I just wanted him to feel safe. Wanted him to know I wasn't going anywhere. That he didn't have to earn my love or permission to just rest. On the 4th morning something changed. He came into the kitchen while I was brewing tea and asked softly, "Mom, do you think I made a mistake marrying her?" The question was fragile, held together by shame and grief and the desire for reassurance. I set down my spoon and faced him fully. "No, sweetheart. You made a choice with the information you had. We all have. The mistake wasn't loving her. The mistake was trusting someone who didn't know how to love you back." He swallowed hard, eyes glossy. "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid. You're human." He sank into the kitchen chair, elbows on the table. "She said things to me, Mom. Things I didn't even realize were wrong at the time. She said you were manipulative. That you tried to control me. That you were jealous of her." My breath caught, but I kept my voice steady. "And did you ever see me do any of those things?" "No," he whispered. "Not once. You've only ever supported me." I reached out and rested my hand over his. Hurt people manipulate. Strong people take accountability. She avoided it at every turn. You cannot blame yourself for not seeing through her lies right away. He nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Something inside him loosened. He finally ate a full breakfast that morning. In small communities, news spreads faster than wind. By the time Jason returned to work the following week, nearly everyone knew what had happened, or thought they did. People whispered, stared, asked questions they had no business asking. Jason told me later that he handled it better than he expected. That when people asked him what went wrong, he simply said, "We grew apart," and left it at that. He refused to paint Emily as a villain in public. Not because she didn't deserve the truth being known, but because he wanted dignity. For himself, for his family, and even in some strange way for her. He didn't want the story to become gossip. He wanted it to be closure. I admired him for that. But even dignity can't shield someone completely. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I was at the farmer's market picking up tomatoes when a woman approached me. Someone from the church. Someone who had once told me Emily was a breath of fresh air. She hesitated before saying, "Mary, I just want to say, I'm sorry. We didn't know." I offered a small smile. "Thank you. I appreciate that." She leaned in slightly. "People make choices they eventually have to answer for. You've held your head high through all of this." I nodded, thanked her again, and left. The interaction lasted only a minute, but it stayed with me all day. How quickly people's opinions changed. How quickly judgment shifted. How quickly the truth rebalanced everything. I didn't feel triumphant. Only relieved. Relieved that Jason wasn't alone in the fallout. Relieved that my name was no longer whispered in the same breath as the word toxic. Relieved to breathe again. It took another month for Jason to begin the legal separation. Emily had moved in with a cousin out of town, and though she sent several messages, some apologetic, some furious, some manipulative, Jason didn't respond to any of them. He blocked her number eventually. I asked him one day if he wanted me involved in the legal process. He shook his head. "No, Mom. I need to do this myself." I respected that. And he did handle it on his own, calmly, methodically, with a steadiness that surprised even him. The lawyer he hired walked him through each step: property division, debt allocation, the fraud report filed with the bank. Emily contested nothing. When the judge asked her if she wished to make a statement, she simply shook her head, eyes unfocused. She'd run out of angles to play. Jason walked out of the courthouse that day with a mixture of sadness and liberation on his face. "It's over," he said simply when we reached the parking lot. But I knew it wasn't entirely over. Not yet. Not emotionally. Healing from betrayal rarely ends with a signature. A few weeks later, he sat beside me on the porch swing, watching the sunset fade into soft oranges and purples. We'd been quiet for a while when he finally spoke. "You know," he said, "I kept thinking the worst part was losing her. But it wasn't." "No." He shook his head. "The worst part was thinking I'd lost you." My chest tightened. "You never lost me, sweetheart. Not for a second." He nodded, swallowing thickly. "I know that now." The evening breeze rustled the jasmine blossoms. The swing creaked under our combined weight. Jason reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. "I found this in my boxes," he said. "Thought you should have it." He handed it to me. It was a picture of Joseph holding baby Jason in our old living room. Both were smiling at something off camera, something I probably said. Something ordinary and small and perfect. I pressed the photo to my heart. "Your father would be proud of you," I whispered. Jason exhaled shakily. "I hope so. He would. You stood up for truth. You faced the pain head on. That takes strength." He leaned his head back, staring up at the darkening sky. For the first time in months, I watched a genuine, peaceful smile appear on his face. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I'm ready to start over. Fresh. Honest." And in that moment, I felt the last bit of fear inside me loosen. My son was coming back to himself. Not the man Emily tried to mold. Not the man defined by betrayal. Just Jason. The boy I raised. the man he was becoming again. He found a small rental house not far from mine, just enough space for him to build a new life but close enough that we could share dinners again. The first night he moved in, I brought lasagna. The one meal Emily always complained was too heavy. Jason laughed when he took the first bite. God, I missed this. We spent the evening unpacking his dishes, arranging his tools in the garage, and setting up the old lamp Joseph once fixed after blowing a fuse. The home felt warm. Not because of furniture or decor, but because of freedom. By the time I left that night, Jason hugged me at the doorway and whispered, "I'm going to be okay, Mom." "I know you will," I whispered back. And I truly believed it. Because healing had already begun. Quietly. Slowly. Beautifully. Sometimes when I sit on my porch in the early evenings, I catch myself listening for the past. The echo of memories drifting through old wooden boards and jasmine-scented air. I think about Joseph, about the life we built together, about the legacy he left behind. Not just the money or the old woodworking tools in the garage, but the love, the steadiness, the quiet lessons he planted in our son. And I think about Jason, about the man he's becoming now. There are still days when his heartbreak shows in small ways, when he hesitates before trusting someone, when he asks me to double-check something he already knows is right, when he lingers a little too long before saying goodbye. But there's strength growing in him too. I see it when he smiles more easily, when he jokes again, when he stops by after work just to ask if I need anything from the store, when he sits with me in the evenings talking about the future, not with fear but with hope. Healing doesn't come in grand moments. It arrives slowly, almost unnoticed, like sunlight creeping across a floorboard. As for Emily, well, I pray she finds honesty someday, or maybe the courage to face herself without anger. I don't wish her harm, not anymore. The truth already gave her the consequences she earned, and Jason no longer carries the weight of her choices. I've learned something too. Sometimes protecting the people we love means telling them the truth, even when it shatters the illusion they've built their lives around. Sometimes it means standing still while everything around you crumbles, trusting that love, real love, will survive the falling pieces. It did for us. It brought my son back home. Not to my house but to himself. And now when Jason hugs me goodbye on my porch, I can feel it, the difference. He isn't hugging me out of guilt or confusion. He's hugging me out of peace. And peace, well, peace is worth more than any wedding, any reputation, any lie someone could tell. Thank you for listening to my story. And now I'll leave you with one question. If someone you loved was living behind a lie, would you reveal the truth, even if it meant breaking their heart to save their future? Tell me in the comments, baby. And don't forget, if you want to hear more stories like mine, go on and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll be right here, waiting to share what comes next.